The Dream Team on the Farm. Written by Annie Sweet, illustrated by Patricia Srigley. Once a year, the Dream Team tryouts were held on Farmer Phil's farm. Every sheep dreamed of being on the Dream Team, and they had been practicing their jumps for weeks. Now, finally, the big day had arrived. It was Saturday, the day of the tryouts. As soon as the rooster crowed at sunrise, sheep started signing up to try out. All the farm animals had risen early and dressed in their very best to watch the tryouts. They were almost as excited as the sheep. Judy Judge arrived and sat down at her table. Samuel Sheepdog took his place by her side. She banged a hoof and said, "The tryouts are about to begin." All the farm animals stopped chattering. The sheep stopped bleating. The farm got so quiet you could hear a feather drop. Judy Judge bleated to clear her throat and said, "If you are 1. woolly, 2. able to jump over a fence in a single bound, and 3. available to work the night shift, you could be on the Dream Team. When I call your name, jump over the fence. You only get one chance. Good luck, every sheep." Spiffy Sheep was the farm favorite to be the top Dream Team pick. Spiffy Sheep could jump the highest fence in a single bound. Spiffy Sheep had the softest, woolliest wool, and Spiffy Sheep knew it. He kept jumping over the other sheep, saying things like, "My wool is softer than your wool," and "My wool is woollier than your wool," and "I can jump higher than you can," and "Neener, neener, neener." It made the other sheep feel bad that their wool was not as soft and woolly as Spiffy Sheep's wool, and it made them feel bad that they could not jump as high as Spiffy Sheep. He was not being very nice, so they did not want to be friends with him. Judy Judge said, "Let's get started." She looked at the sign-up sheet and read, "Number 1, Shouty Sheep." Now, Shouty Sheep was named Shouty Sheep for a reason. Shouty sheep liked to shout loudly all the time. Shouty Sheep ran toward the fence and jumped over it, shouting loudly, "Go to sleep, go to sleep, count the sheep and go to sleep." Judy Judge frowned and said, "A shouting sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 2 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 2, Shaggy Sheep." Now, Shaggy Sheep was long overdue for a wool cut. Shaggy Sheep was scared of the farmer's sharp shears. He hid whenever the farmer came to cut off his wool. Shaggy Sheep was very good at hiding. He won every game of hide-and-seek on the farm, so Farmer Phil never found him. Shaggy Sheep ran toward the fence and jumped. His woolly coat was so long and so heavy he could barely jump off the ground. He certainly couldn't jump over the fence. He bounced off the fence and rolled away down the hill. Judy Judge frowned and said, "A rolling sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 1 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 3, Shamrock Sheep." Now, Shamrock Sheep was an unusual sheep because he had green wool. He said it was because he came from Ireland. The other sheep thought it was because he liked to roll around in the grass and eat a lot of green jello with spinach in it. Shamrock Sheep ran toward the fence and jumped. He was a good jumper and cleared the fence with ease. Shamrock Sheep smiled, and even his teeth were green. Judy Judge frowned and said, "A green sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 4 out of 10. It was the highest score so far, but it was not a good score. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 4, Sparkle's Sheep." Now, Sparkle's sheep loved to decorate her wool. She had gotten a bedazzler for her birthday, and she had stayed up all night decorating her woolly coat for the Dream Team tryouts. Sparkle's sheep had used so many shiny rhinestones, she looked like a rainbow. Sparkle's sheep ran toward the fence and jumped. Her rhinestones flashed so brightly, Judy Judge put on sunglasses. Sparkle's sheep was a good jumper and cleared the fence with ease, although she did lose a few rhinestones when she landed. Judy Judge took off her sunglasses and said, "A bedazzled sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 3 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 5, Shorty Sheep." Now, Shorty Sheep had very short legs, but he always tried his very best to do everything the long-legged sheep could do, and he usually could. But he did have trouble jumping over fences. He even had trouble jumping over grass if it hadn't been cut. Shorty Sheep ran toward the fence and jumped as high as he could. It was not very high and not high enough, so he tried again and again and again and again. "Only 1 jump per sheep," Judy Judge shouted, banging her hoof. Samuel Sheepdog ran over and herded Shorty Sheep away from the fence. Judy Judge frowned and said, "A rule-breaking sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 0 out of 10. It was the lowest score so far, and the lowest score a sheep could get. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 6, Slowpoke Sheep." Now, Slowpoke Sheep was as slow as a snail. Always had been and always would be. Slowpoke Sheep meandered toward the fence, stopping to munch on some grass because he was hungry, and stopping to pick some flowers because they smelled lovely, and stopping to watch a butterfly because it was pretty. When Slowpoke Sheep finally reached the fence, he hopped right over it like a bunny. Most sheep needed a running start, but not Slowpoke Sheep. Judy Judge frowned and said, "A Slowpoke Sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 3 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 7, Sleepy Sheep." Now, Sleepy Sheep liked to nap more than any other sheep, and waiting for her turn to try out had put her soundly to sleep. Sleepy Sheep was snoring so loudly she didn't hear Judy Judge call her name. Judy Judge called louder, "Number 7, Sleepy Sheep." Samuel Sheepdog barked at Sleepy Sheep, but she was snoring so loudly she didn't hear him, and she didn't wake up. Judy Judge frowned and said, "A snoring sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 0 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, Ha 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 ha. Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 8, Skittish Sheep." Now, Skittish Sheep was a scaredy-cat sheep. He edged forward scared because all the sheep and all the farm animals were watching him, and scared because the fence was so high. But Skittish Sheep wanted to be on the dream team so badly he could be brave. Skittish Sheep ran toward the fence. A loud clinking, clanking noise chased after him. It scared Skittish Sheep so much he ran away. Judy Judge frowned and said, "A runaway sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 1 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 9, Shenanigans Sheep." Now, Shenanigans Sheep was a prankster. She liked to play tricks on the other sheep, and she had tied tin cans to Skittish Sheep's wool when he wasn't looking. Poor Skittish. Shenanigans Sheep hadn't meant to scare him so badly that he couldn't try out. Shenanigans Sheep felt so sad that she had spoiled Skittish Sheep's big chance to be on the dream team that she started to cry. Shenanigans ran toward the fence and jumped, but she was crying so hard she couldn't see the top of the fence. She tripped over it and landed on her woolly head in a big muddy puddle. Judy Judge called, "Is there a doctor in the flock?" There wasn't, but Shenanigans wasn't hurt. Her head was so woolly it was like a helmet. Judy Judge frowned and said, "A crying sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 2 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge said, "We'll take a break after the next sheep." "Let me go next," Spiffy Sheep shouted. Judy Judge read the sign-up sheet. "It's not your turn. Number 10, Lambkin." Now, Lambkin was very little to try out, but she was determined to be the youngest dream team sheep ever. She had been practicing her jumps whenever her mother wasn't looking. Lambkin ran toward the fence. Her mama screamed and ran after her. Mama picked up Lambkin and said, "No jumping over the fence for you. You are too little to jump over the fence." She carried Lambkin back to the flock. Judy Judge frowned and said, "A baby sheep won't put anyone to sleep." She held up her scorecard, 1 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep laughed and pointed and said, "Ha ha 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 ha." Judy Judge sighed and said, "Break time. We will resume the tryouts in 1 hour." She was looking discouraged and whispered to Samuel Sheepdog, "Psst, I think these are the worst tryouts ever." 1 hour later, the tryouts resumed. Judy Judge banged her hoof and said, "Next up, number 11, Spiffy Sheep." But where was Spiffy Sheep? The animals looked all around. They finally spotted him at the edge of the field hiding behind a tree. Spiffy Sheep was not looking very spiffy. Spiffy Sheep's soft woolly wool was all gone. During the break, Farmer Phil had sheared off all of Spiffy Sheep's wool. Farmer Phil had fallen in love, you see, and he wanted to give his girlfriend a present. He wanted to knit her a beautiful pair of socks with the softest, woolliest wool on his farm. So he had sheared off all of Spiffy Sheep's wool. Spiffy Sheep missed his soft, woolly wool. He was ashamed to be seen in his birthday suit by all the other sheep. He was too embarrassed to try out. And he knew he had not been very nice to the other sheep, so he thought they would be mean back to him. He thought they would say things like, "We have wool and you don't, neener, neener, neener." But Spiffy Sheep was wrong. The sheep put their heads together and came up with a plan. Shouty Sheep asked for a 10-minute timeout. Judy Judge agreed. Shenanigans Sheep ran off and came back with Farmer Phil's shears. Shaggy Sheep didn't even hide when he saw the shears. All the sheep crowded around Spiffy Sheep. None of the farm animals could see what was happening. After 10 minutes, Judy Judge said, "Number 11, Spiffy Sheep, are you going to try out?" The herd of sheep parted and all the animals could see Spiffy Sheep. He had wool again, all kinds of wool. Spiffy Sheep had long shaggy wool and green wool and bedazzled wool and normal wool and soft baby wool and muddy wool and even wool with tin cans tied to it. And he was smiling. Spiffy Sheep was happy. All the other sheep had been friendly and helpful. He had said sorry for bragging about his wool and taunting them, and he was never going to do that again. Spiffy Sheep ran up to the fence and jumped over it. He was a great jumper, but he was the strangest looking sheep Judy Judge had ever seen. Judy Judge frowned and said, "That sheep won't put anyone to sleep. That sheep will give children nightmares." She held up her scorecard. 3 out of 10. Spiffy Sheep trotted back to the herd, still smiling. Even if he didn't get to be on the dream team, he had friends. You can stop reading here if you like happy endings, and if counting the sheep has made you so sleepy you need to go to sleep. Or you can keep listening a little longer. Judy Judge said, "Next up, number 12, woolly sheep. Or does that say wolfy sheep?" Judy Judge put on her reading glasses and squinted. I must say this sheep has terrible penmanship. None of the sheep knew a woolly sheep or a wolfy sheep. A scary-looking sheep slunk out of the flock. It had a long tail, pointy ears, big eyes, gleaming fangs, and sharp claws. Woolly wool was the only sheep-like thing about it, and even its wool looked more like a knitted sweater than sheep's wool. "A wolf in sheep's clothing! A wolf in sheep's clothing!" the sheep cried, and they all ran away. As Judy Judge ran away, she was heard to say, "See you all at next year's tryouts." But I just want to be on the dream team. I am 1. Woolly, 2. Able to leap over a fence in a single bound, and 3. Available to work the night shift. It doesn't say you have to be a sheep to be on the dream team. And Wolfie was right. I guess I'll have to try out again next year. The end.